depending on the weather, I might before start.
Tomorrow morning here.
Things might
If I
get.
have to close the restaurant,
Beer.
I just end up losing all the snow. No, you don't know which model we talk about. We get the snow.
He cross ran. Cross busy ran.
Okay, it looks like it's 7:30, so why don't we get started? Because I know some people have time limits that we need to go by. So if
Yep.
Mr. Sanders, could you please introduce the items?
Yes, good morning, Council. And so the first item we have, I'll have Kim come forward, is an annual update with our botanical gardens. As we know, it's an exciting place to be able to go for different gatherings, but then also just for some relief from some of the stresses of life and hang out in the gardens. So, Kim, all yours.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me back. I am grateful to be here. Congratulations to all of you, including Madam Mayor, for being sworn in, I think officially tonight, if I got the details correct. The last time that I was here, do I just click this to, yeah. The last time that I was here was July of 2021, right after I started as the president and CEO for the Botanical Garden. So I'm incredibly happy to be here again. I thought I would start off my talk with you this morning in terms of updates. Helping to remind everyone what we've accomplished since the last time I was here. In November of 2021, we officially took over the stewardship of the Robert D. Ray Asian Garden after quite a number of improvements to that garden had been made during the months preceding our assumption of the stewardship. And since then, we've been hosting annual events routinely, mostly in the fall. Have been some of the signature events, most recently called the Rayway, which is a way for us to help lift up the story of what this garden commemorates and the welcoming environment that Des Moines was and continues to be. We also opened the Founders Garden in May of 2022. The Founders Garden is the host to this beautiful sculpture called Threshold, which is in honor of former Mayor Tom Urban, one of our 4 founding community leaders who became influential in bringing the Botanical Center into the Botanical Garden. And the garden that surrounds this beautiful sculpture is a native Iowa dry meadow. And so what we're trying to represent is what one can do with plants that don't require a lot of irrigation. So where you see all these beautiful blooms, there is not a single bit of irrigation built into that garden. So it helps us tell some new stories to our visitors. Adjacent to the Founders Garden is the Hiller Family Rain Garden, also opened in May of 2022. And this is the flip side of that dry coin. We're highlighting native plants that like wet feet. And we're trying to help represent that a rain garden can also be dry because we've had a lot of challenges, right, in terms of the amount of rain that we're getting. And so as this garden takes root, it's also giving us a new opportunity to bring in some new education and water-focused programming, reminiscent and leaning into the history of the Botanical Garden and the role that Des Moines Waterworks played in that history. And then finally, in October of 2023, we were so excited to open Nature Play, which is our very first children's play area outside on the northernmost tip of the developed gardens. We were the recipient of the Rotary Club of Des Moines' $40,000 investment in 2022, which brought this, I guess it was late. We learned about it in 2022. We received the gift in 2023, and this gift was the primary gift to help bring this to life. And so it is an area for children to come and explore truly natural materials, and we're very excited to have an opportunity to continue to build our family programming at the Botanical Garden. So speaking of 2023, I've got copies of our most recent issue of Bloom for all of you. So do you mind if I got some more as well? In this issue of Bloom is our impact report. And I lost my mouse. Here we go. That impact report demonstrates that 2023 was a record-breaking year for us. We served nearly 150,000 unique visitors, the most ever in terms of the record keeping that we've got at the Botanical Garden. We welcomed guests from all 50 states, including many, many international countries as well. We reached more than 17,000 individuals through our education programs. On page 6 of this issue, I believe it's page 6, you'll see all of this, so please take a look. We also are really proud that in May of 2022, in addition to those other 2 gardens that I mentioned, we launched what we call our Pineapple Program, which is a free membership program for those families who are struggling to make ends meet. We've been a part of a program called Museums for All for many years, which has invited guests who qualify for WIC or SNAP benefits to use that card as their method to receive free general admission. Open any time we're open for general admission, that's possible for them. Well, in 2022, we thought, why don't we extend that to Iowa residents, extend that benefit beyond just general admission. And for those residents that qualified for that program, they simply needed to show that membership card one time and they would get a free annual membership and receive all of the associated member benefits. And last year we had 180 of those Pineapple memberships, and we hope to grow that program as well. We also had some records set regarding our school-based education programs and our community outreach. These are 2 programs that are pretty new to the Botanical Garden. We started, my easy way of saying it is we started taking our show on the road back in 2021. And so we went into schools, we continue to go into schools, and this year we served more schools in their classrooms and welcomed 81 school field trips, which is getting much closer, very close, in fact, to pre-pandemic levels. But the numbers of children actually doubled. In addition, we started some community outreach programs, again, where we're taking our show on the road. Some people simply can't get to the Botanical Garden, and we understand that that's a barrier for some. So we went into places like farmers markets in Johnston and non-Des Moines communities in addition to Des Moines communities. Again, this is a first for us to expand into that greater Des Moines area. And again, we doubled the number of programs that we offered last year, and with intention of continuing to to continue to grow that. We now represent nearly 3,500 unique species and cultivars made up at the garden. There are 18 garden spaces with 12 developed acres. Now, those 12 acres are sometimes the admission-based gardens. They're also the free access gardens, like the Wells Fargo Rose Garden and the Robert D. Wright Asian Garden. And you notice that I'm speaking about them distinctly because that's one of the stories that we're trying to tell better and more broadly, that the Botanical Garden has these free access gardens that are always open. We also offer now 10 signature events. Now, that's not single days. That's not 10 single days. That's 10 signature events. So this past Sunday, yesterday, started our Botanical Blues season, which is one of our signature events. Nearly 27,000 people attend those events. Okay, so we had a record-breaking year, and now I'm also excited to share what else we did last year, which is we finally got started with our HVAC improvements. You know that you all probably have been part of these conversations much longer than I've even lived in this area, right? So I'm very happy to remind you of what we used to have, because we don't have this anymore. This makes me very happy. So This is an image of the old boilers that we had in the basement, and I would offer a drum roll. Here are the 2 new boilers that take up very little space compared to those monstrosities. We broke ground on this project roughly the start of March of 2023, and the boilers was the first part of the project that we executed with the goal of having them ready to heat the facility, and I can tell you that they are doing a really good job of it now. We have also incorporated in this solution a geothermal system, which is not yet functioning, but we have completed the drilling beneath the parking lot. So in the blue and the green sections that you see here, that underneath that area of parking lot, there are 70 geothermal wells. The purple area is where all of them will come to be connected into the building. And so that's the part of construction that, one of the parts of construction that remains underway. That purple area is where the vault is held. And just last week, this picture was taken because they drilled, they dug this giant hole, and that big piece of equipment that you see there is called the geothermal vault. It's where all 70 of those wells come together. And then those 2 large pipes that you see coming out, that's where the heated water or cooled, depending on the season, will come into the facility, and the other pipe is where the water will go back out to the wells. So these slides before you have a little bit of data regarding our geothermal system, and it's really been exciting because this is an opportunity for us to lean in to our values and create a new opportunity to educate our visitors on how decisions that we make can align with our values, knowing that, things are changing in the world that we're living in. So, I keep losing the mouse, I'm sorry. We expect that over the next 2 decades that this system will pay for itself. We don't have all of the data yet in terms of what the annual savings will be, but we will have that within that first year it's operational. So the geothermal system will be functioning, we expect sometime this spring. The project continues to be worked on, and we expect substantial completion of the entire thing. Oops, what did I do? Substantial completion of the entire thing in June of this year. So each of those 70 wells has a 1-inch pipe that goes down, there we go, goes down 300 feet, this has been a pretty fun graphic to share with our general public as well. And 42,000 feet of pipe is enough to go around that Iowa Speedway 9 times. Another fun fact. In any case, we are exploring a variety of different innovative funding sources as well, partly around federal legislation, for instance, the Inflation Reduction Act. So we're looking at options to help close the funding gap. We did do some financing to help pay for this project, and we've got some paths forward to close that gap. We are, the final part of this project, in addition to the geothermal, is 14 new air handling units. The first 2 went in last week. So when you see cranes around the dome, that's what is happening. They're getting lowered down into the tunnels so that we can get them installed. We've also already replaced the exhaust fans up in the cupola. And so the project is nearing completion. So here's kind of the true full overview. We still have to restore the full parking lot. We've got 12 more air handling units to replace, as well as the controls and then the testing and balancing that will be done on the entire system. Substantial completion in June of 2024, and we expect completion, full completion, final punch lists in July of 2024. So finally, as we look ahead, we're also making plans for what comes next at the garden. In addition to programming, we're looking at a variety of things from a capital investment perspective that reflect the changes that have been made since July of 2021. I mentioned the addition of the Robert D. Ray Asian Garden as part of the Botanical Garden. That means that our point of entry, right, our starting point, our first impression, starts further south than it ever has. We're also looking at some of the realities with a building that's over a decade old since last update. So we've got some aesthetic updates to do because our North Gallery is a very important earned revenue driver for the Botanical Garden from a venue rental perspective. We've also realized that the garden is in demand for after dark events. After dark, or frankly before dark, or before daytime, I should say. So early morning events when it's still dark outside, and after dark events, after sunset, these are things that we often can't safely do. We do a Music in the Garden series in the summer, but we're actually struggling a little bit once September hits because getting our guests out of the facility outside requires our staff to have flashlights to guide them because the lighting was never designed to have outdoor events. And now that that's a demand for us, we want to respond to that. We want the garden to be the garden whenever and available to people whenever they would like it. Wayfinding is important because as we have added gardens to the north, we get a lot of people not sure where to find the nearest restroom, to find a water fountain, to find their way back into the facility. There's a lot of paths. Sometimes when it's very, very green, you can't actually see the dome from where you are. We want to help people feel comfortable and safe when they're at the garden. We want to help them find their way to whatever it is that they're looking for. We want to continue to improve the greenhouses. We made several $100,000s of investment 2 years ago in 2 of the 3 greenhouses. Now we need to do the third and some other heating and cooling options. And as we've grown in terms of numbers, we want to acknowledge that our lobby and admission area wasn't configured for nearly 150,000 guests every year. And so we want to just do some updating to make things work a little bit more smoothly. We also would really like to accomplish some beautification of that first impression along Robert D. Ray Drive, which is our driveway as you come into the garden. And now we're part of a neighborhood where there are residents living right next door to us. And to help beautify that first impression is something that we're looking to do with the statement entrance along Robert D. Ray Drive. So I've just got some images to bring to life some of what I'm talking about. This is just a dusk photo. You can see that it's very difficult to see the edges of the paths. It's very difficult to see some of those nuances in the concrete and things like that. We want to be safe for our guests. This rendering is actually from the original 7 acres when the garden expanded and became the garden. It was never executed due to a lot of different reasons. So this has not been decided, nor this is for sure what we're looking to do. I just simply say to you that statement entrance has been something to consider for a while, and we'd love to find a way to execute on a statement entrance on Robert D. Ray Drive. We're also exploring really fun and beautiful ways to use lighting, similar to what we've seen done in other beautiful Des Moines locations. If we can use some lighting under that 235 bridge, we would love to beautify that. Again, make a stronger first impression. At some point in the not too distant future, there will be a lot more interesting action happening along the riverfront and all of those things. We want to be ready for that. These are some of the things that we're looking at achieving with our next set of capital improvements. So I have shared with you a whole bunch of things. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions should you have any. This final image is in our Gardner Show House. We call it the DeMoss Skyline. It is actually a living piece. So if you haven't seen it yet, come visit.
Great piece. Does anyone have any questions?
I just want to say thank you to Ben Page and to Kim. I have the privilege and the honor of being the city's representative on, on the board. And it has been such a pleasure. And you both do such great work. And Kim, it is just so wonderful to have you be the director. And things have just gone so wonderfully since you joined the Botanical Gardens, so thank you.
It's incredibly kind. Thank you very much, Linda. Appreciate that very much.
Seems very exciting. And yes, under the bridge, that would be a great improvement.
So the new air handling
Yes.
equipment, will that make it any quieter in the dome?
Not necessarily. We're not sure. Once it's all working, we're not sure. Part of the challenge is that those exhaust fans in the dome, they pull the air out. And so when they're running, you can't, it's very echoey in there, as you know, right? So when they're running, they're noisy. Some of the noise comes from some of the equipment that's in the greenhouse. We think that there will be some improvement with the new air handling units, but that was not, we did not specifically design simply for noise. It was a factor, but it would have changed some of the decisions that we made in terms of equipment. And the size and scope of this type of project didn't make that possible as a driving decision maker. So our fingers are crossed. We're optimistic that there will be some noise pollution improvement. I don't know that the dome will ever be quiet.
Okay, if there's nothing else, thank you again for
Thank
being here
you
today
for having me. I
and
appreciate
giving
it.
us the update. It's exciting news.
Thank you so much.
Next item is the additions to Chapter 42.
I believe Chris and Dalton are going to get us kicked off on these two topics, both of which were asked to be brought back. So.
Mayor and Council, my name is Dalton Jacobus. I'm in the Neighborhood Services Department, Neighborhood Inspections Division. I'm the administrator. I think I've worked with most of you quite a bit already. So with that, I will get started. So today we're here to talk about the grass and weed enforcement that the city's done. Up until this year, I guess calendar year 2023, the grass and weed enforcement within the city of Des Moines was always handled by the Polk County Public Works Department under the authority of the Polk County Weed Commissioner. In November of 2022, the county told the city that they were no longer going to provide that service and that the city would need to take it on. It was a bit quick for us to get a full program in place, and so last year we did a collaborative agreement with them. Our staff manned it. We exercised their authority. They sent the notices. It worked very well. Moving forward, we do got to get something in place in our code, though, so that's why we're here today to talk about the code. So this is just a quick summary of the enforcement for calendar year 2023. We did track this. We tracked it throughout the year, pulled data about once a month, and 1,400 complaints received, 1,200, little under 1,300 initial inspections completed, and that's because there was 121 duplicate complaints. So we got to complain about the property twice before we get out and inspect it, usually several on the same day. Sent out a total of 884 notices, meaning inspections are found to be non-compliant. Obviously, we did 884 re-inspections, 387 referrals for abatement. In our world, code enforcement world, abatement means we send somebody out to take care of it. We mowed 374 of those properties. There's a gap of 13, but because between the time that we re-inspected and referred it for abatement, the owner brought the property into compliance. And the cost of abatement was just under $52,000 for this year.
Dalton, how much have you figured with staffing too, and the inspection portion of it? Do we have a cost for that?
I don't have a hard cost. I can tell you that we had two inspectors devoted to that basically full-time all summer.
Be nice ballpark, something, just to know.
Sure.
You can send it to us later.
Okay. The average cost for each abatement was about $137.
Front yards,
It's mowing all of it.
all of it.
Yep. So this next slide is the complaints that we received by month. There's a huge asterisk on June. So that June asterisk, if we started receiving and filing the complaints the last 7 days of May, but we did not do any inspections until the first week of June because we had the no mow May in effect for this year. It's the first time the city did that. I got some more information on that in a couple slides, but obviously we had a pretty dry summer, and so that $50,000 that we had for abatements, if we had a wet summer, I'd anticipate that is significantly higher. We budgeted $110,000 for abatements, and I think that even with the wet summer, that should pretty well cover it. Some observations on the program. So like I said, we track this data pretty much throughout the year, and the percentage of complaints that we got as valid and the compliance rate stayed pretty well consistent within about 3% through the whole year. So it's not like we had terrible compliance at the beginning of the year and great towards the end. It was pretty well steady throughout the full season.
What do you mean by percentage of complaints verified as valid? I don't think that number was up there.
Oh yeah.
Were most of the complaints determined?
Yeah, so that 884 number, those would be valid complaints. We wouldn't send a notice if it was in compliance. So
about a third of the complaints.
Compliant. Or by the time we got out there, they were in compliance. So, yep.
And Dalton, how many of those would you guess are repeat offenders?
I got some information on that in a few slides here.
Okay, thank you.
So like I mentioned, we had a really, really dry summer. With more rain, we're going to have more growth, more complaints, more mowing. So the cost will go up, the complaints will go up, and that's kind of the nature of the business. And this season, we were 100% complaint-based. I should say 99% complaint-based. So if you had a property on the corner of one of our busiest intersections that was not mowed or maintained, obviously we were going to address that. But we did not give our inspectors that were doing all the other code enforcement that we do, we did not give them the green light to start referring complaints to us because it was still a shared endeavor with the county and we're operating under the county's authority. And so to not swamp them and to see how this program goes, we just kind of kept things even from how we did years past. Moving forward, nodes and corridors would be more or less proactively enforced as well as complaint-based. We're not in every neighborhood on every street every day, so a lot of those are complaint-based, but when we see something egregious, we obviously enforce on it. Same with all of our other enforcement programs. So here's the repeat offender slide. So of the 374 abatements that we did, 111 of them occurred at 35 unique properties. Of those 35 unique properties, 15 of them were vacant lots, and those 15 vacant lots accounted for 56 total abatements.
Like 3 or 4 times.
Right. And so 56 abatements at vacant lots out of the 374 total abatements that we did is just under 15% of the total abatements. So $6,000-ish for the year.
And so that the offending property owners can either pay or it's assessed on their property.
And so when they go to pay their property taxes on, is there a bill?
Yes.
And they have to, when you pay your property taxes, that's included on it. So we do get some of this money back.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Do we get it all back?
If they pay, yep. I mean,
what out of the 51,000 have we got back?
so the county sent them to assessment back in November, December. So none of the ones that have been to assessment, none yet.
Not yet.
Okay.
But historically, there has been, if it gets assessed, it's getting paid.
Okay.
There's no way of getting around that. I do think they roll off. It might be 10 years or something like that, but they get paid.
Added, it's separate from their property taxes. You can still pay your property taxes, but it just shows up as another special assessment, but that they don't have to pay that right away.
Yeah, I can't remember what the dollar threshold is, but if it's like, I think it's like $10,000 or $5,000, if it's more than that, they can spread out that payment over like 10 years. But if it's, Jeff, you know?
No, I don't.
Okay. I know if it's
We can
over a
check
certain
into
amount
that
for
and see.
assessments. Yeah,
And if we, next time report as to how much comes back,
sure.
you know, if we can get that as numbers.
Yeah, I don't have any data on how much we've been paid this year just because it's so fresh.
Yeah.
And truthfully, I won't have data on collected assessments for, it could be 10 years for this calendar year. But I know that if it gets assessed, we get paid. And just generally across all of our enforcement programs, we expect to be paid. So we don't waive fees unless there was something totally bizarre on the property. I screwed something up, my team screwed something up, or it is very, very rare that we do not get paid on something.
And just for clarification, if some of those vacant lots are lots that the city ends up, if it goes to a tax sale, and then we end up selling it to a nonprofit, don't we waive those fees?
We have, there was a few properties this year where we worked with another team in the neighborhood services department where there was a city interest in the property. We took ownership of the property. As soon as we took ownership, we hold ourselves to that same standard that we enforce upon other people. And so as soon as we took ownership of it, we just referred it to our crew for mowing. And so that was one of the times where we're not going to bill ourselves because we owned it. So trying to set a good example. Even though we were turning around and conveying it within the next like couple weeks, unprofessional to convey a poor property like that. All right, so there is no red line chapter 42 for you guys to consider because I need you to kind of provide some recommendations and policy guidance for where we're going with this for the next year. So does the city want to take enforcement action during the month of No Mow May, or do we want to honor the No Mow May? I can tell you that we received an average of 15 calls per day during late April all the way through the end of May. Somewhere between 450 and 500 calls complaining about No Mow May. We also got complaints on it throughout the year. I will caveat that by saying that people don't call me to tell me how much they love what we're doing. So it might have been a popular program elsewhere, but it definitely was not for people calling into me. So
I guess that would have to be a further discussion as to on how we go about that, but I think that's something we have to finalize based on what happened from what I heard. I think we can do things that they want to accomplish in a different way.
sure. Iowa State
I'm throwing
Extension.
that out. Only
I think,
I would not.
yeah, I
there's other programs we could establish.
Like there was even Iowa State. In, you know, so that June 1st, we weren't eliminating the habitat for, you know, for things that even grew in May. That it just seems that we could do a way better job.
I think what it did was is it gave some of the repeat offenders kind of a grace period. So the bad actors knew they weren't going to get charged for a few months and continued to do that. And the folks that were probably doing the right things of what it was meant to do, there probably wasn't that many that participated in it. So yeah, I think we should do something maybe a little different that could
And promote what the
help.
concept was
Yeah.
supposed to be.
Right. But the letting your grass grow.
Well, people were confused by it,
Yeah.
I mean, quite honestly. So
Right.
does anybody else have?
I mean, maybe we create something for active participants rather than just give everyone a pass.
Don't we already
Ryan.
have a program that people can inform us that they have natural landscaping?
Yeah, so like the city has a stormwater best management practices cost share program where if you want to put in a bunch of native plants or stormwater management features, the city will pay to help you do that. It's not my program, obviously. What Iowa State recommended was a mow last May. I think that's what you're leaning towards there.
Right.
Well, that was what the paperwork that we got. Unfortunately, we didn't get that first part, or the last part, last mow. But I think we should I would rather create a system of, if we have programs, to create the natural habitat and get more native plants and things like that, and turn your yard, take half your yard and make it a rain garden. To me, that's more impactful in the long run.
Yeah, probably, yeah. Wouldn't be the most popular thing we did if we had another proclamation of no mow May. I don't think that would.
Okay. That's helpful in that one. We'll keep moving along.
Okay.
We'll bring that back.
All right, so the standard that the council has enforced upon in the past, or that the county has enforced upon, has been 12 inches. Curious if that is an agreeable threshold for, and I'm going to, if that's an agreeable height standard for the city council. 12 inches is about the median, maybe a little longer than some, but
So when it hits 12 inches, then they have how long to rectify it?
Another.
so we, yeah, we get the complaint. If it's 12 inches, we send them a notice. The notice is for 10 days. So it could be,
So it's 20 inches.
I would think looking at this, 8 inches.
I would vote for the 8 inch.
I would go for the 8.
Because by the time we got it, it'll be, if not longer, if it rains.
I mean, 8 inches is what that,
Yeah, that's pretty tall. It's tough to get a mower through at 8 inches.
I mean,
Yeah, sure,
does anybody else have any other?
I'll talk a little bit about the distinction of the properties as well. I know they're kind of somewhat in combination.
yeah. So some cities break it out by like the zoning district. Some of them break it out by, it's largely zoning district, developed or undeveloped. If we want to continue to provide the same level of service that we provided, I'd recommend sticking with the 12 inches. We were able to get out to properties significantly faster after the compliance period had run up within about 3 days than had been happening in the past because we were paying to have it done. So the days of us referring something for a cleanup and then it's sitting for a month before a mow crew could get there. It's our programs. We're taking pride of ownership on it. If you want to move it to 8, 10 inches, do that as well.
If you think you can keep up with, then I would say leave it at the 12 right now, and then we can always see how this program.
Would 10 significantly change the amount of response that you're going to get? Because by that time, it for sure will be 12.
Mm-hmm.
Is that going to significantly change it so you wouldn't get there within the 3-day period, is what you're saying?
No, I think that the response by the contractor, we hired the same contractor. We did a competitive bid process and hired the same contractor that Parks is using, and just so happened to work out that way. They're the low bid on it. So the response time, I'm not so worried about. The cost of the program, while we do capture it, it could go up, and our enforcement could go way, way up. I don't have statistics for the number of properties that would have been in compliance if the standard was 10 inches this last year.
It was 10 inches?
No, if it
was 12.
It was 12. Yep.
Yeah.
Can we change the repeat offenders and charge them more?
What was that?
The repeat offenders, can we not, if you're a repeat offender, each time they should be charged a higher cost
It's more of a fine.
than,
Yeah, you would be able, I think, to create a fine system. If you want to do that, that's going to take enforcement action as opposed to simply mowing and assessing. That's going to be a greater cost back to the city.
Right, you'd have to go
But
through the
you
court
can't
system.
you can't increase the fees that you charge because the fees that you charge are limited
Cost-based.
to the actual cost to the city.
How long, so, we have a pretty good sense of how long it takes for 12 inches to grow, right? Because we've got these repeat offenders. So how long does it take to get to 12 inches?
I mean, the vacant lots that we mowed them about once a month. So we mow them down to 4 or 5 inches. Takes them a couple weeks, depending on rain, to grow again, and then right.
Every third day and the sun
Right.
came out every day. I mean, there's no way
No,
to
depending.
average.
It's just hard to say how long it takes to get to 12 inches. There's so many things, rain and temperature and all that goes
But if
into
we
it.
compromise and go to 10 inches,
Yeah, I mean, that's
not a bad idea.
Okay.
that's what I would prefer.
cool.
Is this our enforcement priority? Because what we're saying by changing this is that we're going to put more resources into the weed management effectively, right? I mean, if we go from 12 to 10, it's going to require more resources to enforce at that level. Of all the things that we have neighborhood inspections doing, is this where we want to encourage them to spend more time?
To Josh's point, I mean, are you going to need more people to make it 2 inches less than the 2 full-time people you have, or are we okay with that?
Yeah, so I don't know.
I mean,
We'll start with the 2.
there you
Yeah.
go.
So I can tell you that last year we had 2 people. It was a new program, and we wanted to. There was a direct contrast between how the county was running it and how we were running it. And so I certainly did not want to provide a lower
Nobody's
level
going
of service.
nobody's going to go out there with a tape measure and say. I mean, if the grass is long, somebody's going to call.
Oh, sure.
And,
Yeah.
I mean, by the time you get there,
I think based on your analysis of everything, if you believe that you want to stay at 12, I mean, it's, or we go to 10, either way. I think based on what you think your staff can do and where you analyze, I guess, grass growing. And if you think you can get to it sooner, that it doesn't go to 12 and it's going to take a month, then I think that's been the bigger issue, is the time that it always took to get it mowed if it was passed.
So I'll say that when we were catching up from the no-mow May, we had about a week and a half backlog on our mow contractor. But other than that, after we caught up mid to late June, we were at these properties within 3 days of the compliance period. So
Okay.
the days of us waiting for a month, and it really was sometimes a month for an abatement.
So
10 or 12.
10 or
I'm
12.
indifferent
10.
either way.
10 for me.
I would do 10 myself.
I would do shorter than we have now. I think
Okay.
it's an important statement.
Okay.
I think the consensus is
I
then
do
let's try
12.
10 and we'll see what
I
it,
think that's the biggest thing that I hear at some of the neighborhood meetings.
It is for me.
That definitely is.
All right, we'll bring it back.
I mean, it is a priority for the neighbors, the neighborhood.
Another complaint that we got, and it was pretty unpopular when I told people this, is that we do not run clearing and grubbing with this program. This is a grass and weed mowing program. So if the nuisance could not be abated by mowing, we did not start an enforcement case on it. That's not how our contract was written. That's not the intent of the program over the last however long since it started. I got a picture on this next slide here. This is prefer to not get into details, but it's the backyard of a property here in Des Moines. On either side of that property are turf backyards. This has just been abandoned. There's no amount of mowing that's going to fix that. It would be a clearing and grubbing operation. Is this something that, now be mindful that this abatement would probably cost well over $6,500, and so it would have to go through the court system. We'd have to file on them. There's not a ton of these out there, but there are some. The abatement would take longer. We may have to bid it out. Is this something that the council would like for us to enforce upon?
Do you get many complaints?
Yes.
Is there, like to me, it would be a higher level of issue if it was all surrounded by our, residential property.
And this one
You
is.
can do R1.
Yeah.
I mean, that would, if it's surrounded by a bunch of rooftops, then
Mhm.
Like this looks like it is.
you're, I mean,
There's a house.
garbage and trouble is going to stay in that area. And that's what we're going to get in that area if you don't clean it up.
So, and
I
I
guess
don't want
I
to
would-
take up too much time,
Okay.
but, okay, so for many, many summers, I have had to deal with the overgrowth that looks just like this along Euclid Avenue. If you take from like East 25th to East, or from like
East 29th to East 33rd,
to East 33rd.
and it's the
and-
garbage pit.
And many of those, a lot of that land is owned by Iowa DOT. And the neighbors have told me that for years past, DOT took care of it. Now I'm being told, no, Public Works. Public Works has said, we don't take care of it, it's the property owner's job. Well, the property owners that live on those the streets, there's a big ravine, and then it's all brush. It's been that way for years and years and years. We can't expect them to take care of that. But I'm not even sure they should be fined for it. Are we talking about things like that? And Scott, how many conversations have I had with you about this? Where, I mean, it looks awful. It just collects garbage, and I don't know who's supposed to take care of it. If the city's now saying the property owners to take care of it, people have lived there for 50 years and have never taken care of it.
Right.
It would,
There are similarities that we could try and resolve with this same issue. So what we're hearing is that there is interest in possibly drafting something and spending that time, because this would be an exercise in working through, how close to other residential properties would it need to be cleared and kept clean. It's not a complete, because I've got space like this in my backyard that's 80 feet behind the house. I mean, it's way back.
But you own that.
Right. And the neighbors actually do too on the opposite side of the creek. So there are going to be areas that are going to look like this. And so we're going to have to figure out where it's allowed and where it's not. So we didn't want to spend that time if there wasn't any interest at all on council to
I think it's a
review that.
safety issue along Euclid.
Right. But from streets and whatnot.
I'm not sure where this is, but there is a street that has backyards where the standard you're saying to keep your house in compliance, this property could be it, or at least a portion of this property could be in compliance with that standard. Because it's residential and it could be a large back lot that allows this to be away from the structure. I mean, I don't know for certain, but I think it's tricky to come up with a standard, but I think
Take a stab at it.
I'd prefer to prioritize staff time elsewhere, but if we're going to do something like this in a very limited way,
yeah, I think it would be a limited structure. You probably have already done a lot of work anyway on it, so if there's something you can come up with a recommendation, if it's in between two houses and you know how many complaints you get, if it's impactful too.
Right.
But I think we do need to look at some of these other areas.
but yeah, do we care front yard versus backyard? Does it make a difference? Like,
Well, I think those are some of the things. And again, you've taken the calls, you understand where this area is, and looking at some of that, I can understand depending if it is the back or if it's in between two houses, is this what you have?
Right.
So I think that if you want to put a stab at it,
The most egregious cases.
Right.
Address those, including the ones that are right up against the street, so that sidewalks and things
People on
aren't.
East 32nd couldn't pull out on Euclid.
Right.
I don't understand why a homeowner is responsible for DOT land, but
well, I think
nobody's
that
been able to answer that for me.
that was an area I saw yesterday that we
clarify.
could do a little garbage cleanup. It's
Sure.
We'll bring something back.
Next is, are we okay with the 10-day compliance period before referring to abatement? Shorter than 10 days doesn't provide a reasonable amount of time for people to get the property mowed, especially accounting for mail. So just, I guess this is, my recommendation is keep it no shorter than 10.
okay.
Easy enough.
and my guess is if we're talking about doing anything on grub clearing, you're going to need a lot longer than 10 days for compliance.
Oh,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And the grub clearing, I mean, we'll have to work with the legal department because the cost of abatement is going to be pretty high. So we'll probably need a court order to do it. And so I don't, for what it's worth, going back to that, I hate to go back to it, but setting expectations on that one won't be mowed within 2-3 weeks. That'll probably be we got to get on a court calendar. It'll probably be a year out. So a case that we start this coming season, it won't bear fruit until probably 2025.
Stop bearing fruit.
And then last question is, does the city council want to enforce this ordinance on large undeveloped parcels? And if so, could it be tailored to the border areas of these parcels? So over in Mr. Gatto's area, there's a lot of undeveloped land, or land that's currently being developed. So we got complaints on those. The intent of what we bid out this program for this year was largely residential and commercial lots that weren't being maintained. It wasn't ag management. It wasn't ditch management. Certainly could be. What some other cities do is put a requirement that you maintain a border area on a huge, let's say you got a 40-acre parcel, and there's actually a lot of those here in town. Instead of managing or requiring that they mow the entire thing to a height of 10 inches now, that could be a bit unreasonable for some of these parcels. So if it's a huge parcel, mow it to 25 feet back from the border area down to a height of 8 inches or something. I don't have specifics on that, but
You're right. I do have a lot of those, but a lot of the border areas, if they can maintain those to a better quality than some of them are, and that would probably keep some of the garbage and other things that end up going into those undeveloped areas. That could help.
sure.
Was my thought. So
I think even if they're in an area where it's more of a safety issue, if it's on a corner or something where,
Next to
if
a
anything,
school.
it's, yeah, I don't know if I would get to anybody else. I don't know if I'm
the
how
borders.
big an issue.
So when there's so that's the second time that's come up. When there's a safety issue, we don't go through the code enforcement process. We work
Just
with
do it.
Public Works and Engineering, and they have a crew just do it.
Okay.
So like the East 33rd Street thing, or the East Euclid. I can't remember the exact details of
East
that one.
32nd, it was
Right.
a hazard.
Right. I went out there and looked at it myself. I can't remember what the resolution was, but this is our first year in NID being involved in this, so that was our first exposure to it. It sounds like there's quite a bit of history. But yeah, if there is a safety issue, it's not a 10-day engineering, public works, sometimes DOT, sometimes we leaned on the Polk County Weed Commissioner to exercise authority on some other things. We can take care of those.
Okay.
I'm hearing that generally the border area, if it's a large undeveloped parcel,
And does that pretty much match what our suburban neighbors are doing?
so the border area was actually a recommendation from Malcolm. So when we do draft that ordinance, I'm probably going to lean on him because he sees that in other large metro areas. You got to think a lot of our other suburban neighbors, they don't face some of the challenges we do. But the ones that do distinguish, they're distinguishing based on zoning classification or developed versus non-developed. All right, that is it for grass and weeds. Do you guys have anything else you'd like to discuss on that? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, chapter 60 is coming right up here. All right, so the city's
You want to continue with the policy?
Sure. So the city's housing code is found in Chapter 60. It applies to rental properties in the city of Des Moines, largely properties that are not owned or occupied by the owner of the property or a member of the family or the nuclear family of the owner. So here's a history from the last year and a half, 2 years on Chapter 60. In November of 2022, the city adopted the 2021 International Property Maintenance Code. It generally lines up well with the International Building Code, International Residential Code, and all the other I codes. Those are generally the codes that the PDC and Development Services references as well. In June of 2022, so this is all before I got here, so I'm going through old council minutes and giving you what I can understand from it. But in June of 2022, the city amended Chapter 60, specifically sections 60-185 and 186 were added to require inspections of mechanical equipment and to require the separation of shared forced air heating systems. So think of a large house built in 1900 that was then converted into 6 apartments. A lot of them have still one furnace in the basement that's serving all the units. And so in June of 2022, the city added a code section that those all have to be separated. So generally, the code updates that we have coming in 2024 fall into these categories. And I've got a slide for each of these moving forward, so I won't read through each of them for you.
Dalton, are we going to come back and talk about the requirement for the HVAC inspections on large apartment complexes?
Yeah, that's in here.
Okay.
It's in here, yep. So the first, we'll call it bucket of changes that we've got coming are for administrative and licensing. This first one is to allow for us to charge a fee when issuing a license to a new owner of a rental property. So the rental certificate, the rental license, it follows the property. And when a property sells, it's the responsibility of the new owner to reach out to us to let us know that they now have ownership of the property. So we have contact information for them. And we reissue the license. It's for the same term. We don't go out and inspect it again. We give them the duration of the license to the new owner. It's not a huge issue unless we have large portfolio transfers where we're doing 60 or 70 of these at a time and there's no fee associated with it. Historically, that transfer has all been done for free. We had a couple of them over the last year where we reissued 100 plus licenses and locked up our clerical team's work for about a week in doing that.
And isn't it currently now, if I still have a year and a half left on my rental certificate and then I sell it, that transfer just goes over to the new owner without a fee?
Right.
And,
Yep.
and what you're saying now is now you want to charge everybody even though they've got a year and a half left.
Right, because we're reissuing the license. We're not re-inspecting the property. We're not giving them more or less time remaining on the license, but there is time associated with our staff performing the administrative function of receiving the application, logging it, creating a new license, sending it out. Again, for 1 or 2 properties, this is not a big deal. When there's wholesale changes in portfolios for some of the bigger players, that's where it gets a little burdensome.
Your language is it allows for staff to charge it.
Right.
Does that mean there'll be some subjectivity, or will there be a threshold?
We could, whatever you guys would prefer. And keep in mind that this would also require an amendment to the fee schedule, so this is just putting something in the code. We wouldn't be charging it as soon as this is adopted. But
So what would you recommend? What's the threshold? 25, 50? I mean, what is it?
5? I don't know. So
5
that
takes up any more than 5 is going to take up.
burn up,
So it's
An
more
hour or so.
administrative costs.
right? And we wouldn't be charging the full license fee. So a license for a single family is $87.50. We're not doing an inspection, so it's not realistic to say we're going to charge you $87.50, but $15, $20, I don't think that's an unreasonable request.
My recommendation is that it be set, whatever it is, because if you can charge it, you cannot charge it, and that just creates arguments
Yeah, I would
with
say.
everybody. You know, Joe, call Jacobus, get me out of this.
So keep the fee smaller
Keep
by
the fee
charging
small,
it
just- yeah.
all the time.
All the time.
Okay.
So whether it's 1 or whether it's 100.
So, but it's going to be a small fee? You don't have to, and I sent you an email, I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't be charging the
$20, $25.
15, 20, 25, yeah. I mean,
Administrative cost fee.
right. And we would have to put that in the fee schedule. It's not even in there yet, so it's not even an update. It'd be an addition.
I think
But this
that's
is just
fair.
getting it in the code so that when it is in the fee schedule, we can charge it.
Yeah.
But
And again, we cannot charge more than the time spent on it, so we'll dig
Right.
deeper into the analysis to make sure we're not
I
overcharging.
mean, is it a problem just to keep it in the previous owner's name until it comes up? It's within a year and a half.
yeah,
Yeah, what?
it's a problem.
Yeah.
So when we get complaints about properties
We need to know who owns it.
and how to get a hold of them.
Okay.
So if you want to go back and analyze those costs, minimal
Sure.
fee, I think there's consensus to do that.
Okay. Right. We're not trying to chisel anybody out of money that we shouldn't be taking from them, but there is time associated with it, so there should be costs as well, even if minimal. Currently, we don't have the ability within the code to reject an application for a property that does not have the zoning classification for the number of units that they have listed on their application. So again, I'm going to go back to the single-family house. Somebody buys it, they chop it up into 4 apartments. You don't have the zoning classification for it, so we really shouldn't be issuing as a rental license for it. So the ability to just outright reject that application and not even get it started in the rental inspection process.
I didn't know that we didn't do that. I
Yeah.
mean, that seems pretty logical that
Yep.
we would do that.
I assume that wouldn't have grandfathered unit. So, I mean, we just had one come before us where they let their rental certificate expire unbeknownst. But in this case, like, if they're grandfathered, they'd be able to renew,
Right.
but if you let it lapse,
Right.
I mean, I thought they didn't get the rental certificate in that case, but you're telling me we would have issued the rental certificate and just enforced via zoning.
So we would have received and filed the rental application. We would have conducted the inspection. We would probably not, we wouldn't have, if when we've come across this a handful of times, we would not have issued the license, but we're stuck in a gray area where by Chapter 60, we're obligated to issue it because it complies with our requirements. So it's cleaning up what makes sense. So, yeah. Yep.
So, yeah.
Add language allowing for the revocation or suspension of a business license. It's right now only mentioned in a subsection of license requirements. The criteria and everything about it is not well written.
So it's another cleanup.
Yes. We are going to codify the rental complaint process and add penalties for noncompliance. So that is formalizing what is already administrative policy right now. And then we are going to clarify on how the code applies to vacant units on a multi-unit property. So technically, let's say we go into a 30-unit apartment building. One of them is either not a rental, they're using it for storage or for an office, or it's gutted and they're in the middle of remodeling it. Well, I could go in there and find 100 violations and hold up the rental license for that property. It's not what the intent of our program is. So what we'd like to do is go in and make sure that those units are safe, so there's not exposed wiring and gas leaks and things that are going to endanger the other people in that building, and then add a note to the license and get the license issued.
Do you mean license or do you mean rental certificate?
So when we went to Intergov, the code changed to rental license because the module in Intergov that we use to issue these certificates is the licensing module.
So it's all called a
License.
license
Yeah.
now, not a
Yep.
rental
I mean, it's
certificate.
potato, but yeah, same
So
thing.
we have a rental license.
Right.
Those are all good.
Thank you. The second bucket of changes that we'd like to make are to the appeals board. Specify what may be appealed to the board, and then bring these criteria in line with what's identified in the 2021 IPMC. Amend the enforcement process to have the board hear owners, or have the board hear appeals that are filed by the owners. So currently the board is the final step in our enforcement process. It's an automatic. And so if there's somebody, like we have a board meeting on Wednesday, for properties that are going to the board on Wednesday, we've been trying to comply some of these since May. Just takes a while to get them to that point. And every single one of them, after noncompliance, they go to the board, whether or not the owner is requesting it. By code, that is what we were required to do. And so it's not truly an appeals board. What we were trying to do is turn it into an appeals-based board. They're appealing a cited violation or an incurred cost or a decision rendered by the administrator. And then add, instead of city, when we refer things, my staff refers things to the Housing Appeals Board. We generally request that the board issue a fine. That fine is calculated by the number of violations times the number of days in violation past the compliance date times $5. And that fine is not to exceed $5,000. We also ask that the Housing Appeals Board authorize legal action against the properties. So instead of having them make the determination on at the end of this process, after the case has been worked for 5, 6, 7 months, we would like to add language that owners may be subject to a civil penalty if in noncompliance with Chapter 60.
And just to be clear then, Dalton, that administratively, those decisions will get made, and then if the owner chooses to appeal, it would move on to the board.
Yes.
Otherwise, it's final at that point, and there'd be a certain amount of time they'd have to
Sure.
appeal.
Yep.
So would that mean that there,
A little tricky over here.
Yeah.
so.
would that mean that there'd be fewer cases going to the appeals board?
Yes, they'd largely be a request by the owners or the management agent to take them there.
Okay.
So in the last 16 months, we've had 3 or 4 requests for appeals to the board. And I would anticipate that holds about true. I always encourage people, if they call me angry about a cited violation, you can always file an appeal. I mean, I'm not going to take it personally. I'd encourage you to do that. It's your right. And some people do. So. The third bucket of changes, and again, I'm simplifying things here, but the third kind of group that we're trying to clean up is clarifications on recently adopted or amended codes. Technically, dormitories are not exempt from the HVAC separation requirement. That was not the intent when this code section was written, so we have not been actively enforcing on it as such. It would be a bit ridiculous to go into Drake and have them put in 1,000 different HVAC units. It would not go well. Largely, that code section was written for like chopped up houses. The code does not. The city code requires that the occupant of a property has use and free access to all accessory structures on the property. That's not supported in the 2021 International Property Maintenance Code. And so what I would recommend doing is taking it back and allowing an owner to use the shed in the back of a property or a detached garage. And then...
Or what? Just to use it?
Use it or restrict access to the occupant. Yep. Now, because it is on the premises, we are going to inspect it because we don't get into lease agreements. So if it's there, we're going to inspect it to make sure it's in compliance with the code, but whoever's using it, we don't particularly care. So, rather, what my recommendation is we don't care. Currently, we do care. So.
Dalton, how do short-term rentals fit into this? Specifically Airbnb and Verbo.
Yeah. Mrs. Bozen's brought me a handful of them. If it is a dedicated short-term rental property, they're required to have a rental license on it. And so we've got quite a few. Mr. Mandelbaum, you brought me a handful over like south or north of Grand area, Ingersoll area. So if it's somebody that is renting out a room in their house and they're also going to be there, it's still an owner-occupied property and our code does not apply.
Okay.
If it's a property that an investment group buys, which is not uncommon, that property is not occupied except for when it's rented, then it is required to have a rental property or rental license.
how do you determine if, I'll just use Airbnb units, are being, do have certificates, if it's an entire home? Do you, like, scan the Airbnb directory, online directory, and find out if they're in compliance, or just, is this complaint driven?
So we come about them largely complaint driven or through junk and debris. A lot of the illegal rentals that we find, they come on our radar because we start a junk and debris case. We do our research to find who to send this notice to. Oh, that person doesn't live at the property. All right, cool. Now we're going to hit you for Chapter 42 violations, junk and debris, and we're also going to send you an illegal rental notice. So a lot of them come on our radar that way. They come on our radar from council complaints, from residents, from neighborhood associations, and then to verify whether or not they're owner occupied a portion of the time. We do research the posting websites and see if it's advertised as you can rent a bedroom in our house, we're still going to be here, or if it's you get the run of the house or the run of the property. And this,
There are a lot of them out there that we still don't
Know about.
know about, but there are probably more that should be
yes.
identified.
The state, it's my understanding that before I got here, the city tried to regulate short-term rentals, and I think that the state preempted, yeah. So,
Shock.
one of the code requirements that was added over the last couple of years is a requirement that every 3 years a property owner has to provide an inspection report for their HVAC equipment to make sure that it's going to last through the winter and that it's safe. I understand, and again, I was not here for it, but it's my understanding that the council requested that provision. It's extremely expensive for the landlords. However, it does provide a certain level of safety. So I've heard from a handful of you individually. I just kind of want to know, do you want to continue to require that HVAC inspection? Do we loosen the requirements on it? Do you want to eliminate it?
Could you help with a little history of this? I mean, I don't recall when this came before council, and if we modeled what we're doing based on a model policy or something. I do recall having an apartment complex where we had, in weather like we're going to have in about a week.
Right, we had issues.
We had that apartment that was without heat, and I think that's part of what prompted this. So I understand the need, but I also know that some of these folks have internal folks who inspect or who maintain, and that may be a way if those folks are licensed to do something. So what is the model for how you do something like this?
So it's my understanding this came about because of no heat complaints in multifamily properties a few years ago.
Yep.
I can say that I've been here for about 1.5 years now, and the no heat complaints that I've got, the owners and managers, and this is just the ones that I'm aware of, and only over the last 1.5 years, so take this with a grain of salt. The complaints that I have received, the owners and managers are, 1, aware of it, and 2, working on it. So usually the time that it takes to get it restored isn't for lack of effort. They can't get parts. And when boilers are going down, it's because it's extremely cold and everybody's trying to get parts or service tax. It's my understanding this was based, that inspection requirements were largely modeled after the mechanical code. As far as allowing some of the maintenance staff to inspect it, the code is very specific that it requires a licensed individual to do it. I don't know of any of the property management companies or owners in town that have, unless you're an HVAC contractor that has a rental on the side, a licensed HVAC contractor on staff to do that inspection.
When did we pass that code?
I believe it was June of 22.
Maybe come back with pros, cons, what you think would be the best option for that. I do believe things need to be inspected if they're being rented at some of what level is. Because of the complaints we did get, I realized in one case it took a few calls to get something done, and it was definitely, like the weather. So I think that there's a fine line on making sure that these systems are up to date and working and safe.
So if there's, sorry, go.
It's part of the regular inspections, right? That would occur, the HVAC.
Yeah, it's required every 3 years by the code.
It's within the regular time of inspection.
Yes. The schedule.
So when we go out and inspect an apartment, do we add this then to it?
We don't inspect it. We require a licensed
We require
HVAC.
them.
Yeah, and they provide some kind of certification
Certificate,
invoice
okay.
with a license number or something. So if there's appetite to change that, there's 2 options that you got, or that I would consider, or I'd present to you to consider. The first one is to allow maintenance staff to provide some kind of a maintenance log saying that this has been serviced and it's okay. We would strike the requirement for a licensed individual. The second would be to strike it altogether. I think if there is appetite to change it, and we've got a lot of negative feedback, is to allow the maintenance staff to provide some kind of a professional maintenance log on it. But
Is that professional staff's recommendation?
my recommendation,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know the context in which this code was adopted, and I can only find the council minutes online. So I don't know what conversations the council at the time had with staff when it was adopted.
I would ask, go ahead.
Just add, I remember, and it was right after COVID, and we had a real supply issue with being able to get parts for things. So I think that's where some of this came about, because we did have a complex that they were without heat for some time. I am supportive of making some changes to what is currently there. I think it's very important to have your HVAC systems inspected. You know, if you've got a home and you're not in it every day and you don't have a maintenance person on staff, then yeah, I think it should be inspected. I think everybody should have their furnace inspected. For the multifamily units where we have so many that are all electric, I mean, I think what we're concerned about is cracked heat exchangers and carbon monoxide. And many of the multifamily units are all electric. And I think it seems an extra burden to require that every one of their units be inspected every 3 years when they have maintenance staff there that are making inspections. Or require, if I have 100 units, give me a percentage that need to be licensed. But I would prefer just to have the maintenance staff for these large multifamily complexes. They're doing a good job. That's not where we see the complaints.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think the maintenance, I guess my question and what I'm trying to understand, we can't be the only city that is dealing with this issue. And I don't know if what we adopted was sort of standard best practice or if we varied off of that, because there have to be in a lot of these large multifamily or someone that owns multiple, they have a trained maintenance staff, they're inspecting the units regularly. That to me seems sufficient if we get a maintenance log. I guess my question is if we then notice problems, I'd want to react to that, because the goal is to make sure that oftentimes if you have someone check your heating unit in October before we get the weather like this, you can find things that might go wrong and break down so that you avoid having it break down in the middle of winter when it's cold and everyone's trying to get parts.
Right.
And that's the goal of this, is to avoid that breakdown so people aren't spending a week in their apartment.
It's for safety factors too. So I would weigh in that I would think there needs to be some mechanism for still checking to what level. But I think whether it's logged in or whatever, based on some of the calls that we've gotten, I would still say to hold people accountable that there needs to be some inspection or logging of those.
So I forgot to mention our second consideration here is you can have you guys could change the code to allow for the maintenance person to inspect and certify that it's okay, provide something to us. We can put together the criteria for that. That is, they submit it to us, and then the second option is if we get it and it doesn't look right, or if we're on site and it doesn't look like the device is held together by bubble gum and duct tape, we can require an inspection by a licensed professional. If we have reason to believe that there's an issue, so.
I like that.
That's good. That's really good.
Okay. All right. All right. The next group that we're changing is to get consistency with other codes. So pool security and safety requirements, we're going to put a direct reference into Chapter 26, which is the Permit Development Centers Building Code, for consistency. We're going to put property boarding specifications. So you drive down the street, if there's a property that caught on fire, my team is the one that facilitates the board up of that structure. Technically, the standards at which it's boarded up need to be referenced in our code, so we're going to make that reference. And that's from Appendix A of the 2021 IPMC. We're going to amend the language that requires deadbolts and unit entry doors to be in line with PDC and other international code requirements. And we are going to amend the pest control section to bring the requirements in line with the 2021 IPMC.
And is this only for rental properties?
Yes.
When do you expect to bring these back to us, Dalton?
I got to make the changes. Well, the changes are largely made. There's a couple of them where I wanted to see what kind of feedback you guys had, and then I'm going to have legal department review it. So a month maybe.
A month? Just a month for the legal department?
2 months? I don't know.
I don't think the legal department was a month.
There's a zinger.
So not the next meeting, but the first meeting in February, we look to see these changes on the agenda.
No,
Oh,
I don't want to commit
Okay.
legal to,
Well, I think
we'll need time to make sure.
that'll depend
On what changes?
on how quickly we get the draft and suggested language and.
don't
set
try
everything.
bailing Jeff out. Jeff can speak for himself, Scott. He's okay.
But I appreciate it, Scott.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah. So
We'll see it before March then, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'm hoping. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That we
The last two sections are on one slide here because there's not a ton to them. We're going to update the criteria used to identify and move forward with public nuisance enforcement. So the Blitz on Blight program, there's currently like 27 code sections that we can reference when we start or proceed with a public nuisance enforcement case, a Blitz on Blight case. Some of these, by definition, my house that I live in with my family would be considered a public nuisance. So we either need to strike them or amend them. And then for public nuisances, we're going to cite language that clarifies like that it's a hazardous structure and not necessarily a deficient structure. Deficient structure enforcement would need to come through a property maintenance code because at the end of the day, the only solution that I have through Blitz on Blight is to tear something down. So just because there's a window broken doesn't mean the house needs to be torn down. Not saying that it doesn't need to be fixed, but the solution is not necessarily demolition. And then, as with pretty much every code update, there's just wording and Scrivener's errors. So spelling, formatting, punctuation, wording. So.
What about dumpsters? That was
Um,
in the email that I received when we talked about the
Sure.
code dumpsters.
Currently, it did not change anything. I don't have anything in my proposed red lines for it, but I certainly can if that is a will of the council.
No, I just didn't know. It said inspections, it says dumpster enclosures.
Yeah. So for context and background for the rest of you, a few years ago, the city council or the city adopted a code section that required dumpster enclosures on multifamily properties, regardless of how long those properties have been there and how long they've been without a dumpster enclosure. There was quite a bit of pushback from the landlord community because it's a pretty significant cost. A lot of times it triggers a site plan review. The Band-Aid has largely been ripped off on that. The properties that should have dumpster enclosures, I believe, do have them now because the code's been in place for a while. So I'm not recommending changes, but we certainly can.
And we're not
entertain them.
talking about for single-family homes. You're talking about multifamily. Okay.
I know there's other discussions going on about this, and I'm supportive of it, but it seems like a quick fix is to make sure that we don't require a site plan review for this requirement that we're requiring. It only improves the property, and maybe we'd have better compliance.
Yeah, I think that's probably a Scott question. That's a heart and soul of our permitting review process, and we do the enforcement. We don't. My team and I were in a different department, and we're strictly enforcement. We don't get into the admin stuff, but
But we're
I'm
not in
with you.
silos, right, Scott?
Right.
We're all working together,
Right.
Scott, right?
That's true.
So I hate hearing.
But the codes need
Well,
to
what
line
he's
up.
supposed,
I understand.
Yeah, I don't want to speak for another department
No, I
or
understand
process I
what
don't
you're saying,
control, but
that's
right,
part of how we join some things together. And
right.
Yeah. No, that's
Carl and many of us have talked. I think re-looking at what triggers site plan review is a critical step for getting investment in our neighborhoods, and making sure that people can do more minor improvements to their property without triggering
triggering
the
it.
need for a significant and park, parking
Time.
lots is one of
Yeah.
them, but there's just a lot that we could do to spur investment, and all these kind of little requirements that spur a site plan review, is just cold water on any development idea. They don't even take it to the next step.
So I would hope that we can bring back some ideas on how to address that. It does need to be done carefully because, if somebody's going to make just a couple changes to their site, we want to make sure it's consistent with what the full code would require, such that if there was a full site plan, what they're doing maybe wouldn't be compliant. Does that make sense? So I'm with you on trying to find a way to allow for just incremental improvements, smaller projects, but we need to make sure that it leads to full compliance at the end. So it's more that phasing that we've talked about that allows for what is the full plan going to look like? And yes, I'm only going to address one item in the next couple of years. But you could see where if you allow them to just do one item at a time, if they haven't understood what the full site plan needs to look like.
Right. But I think, we're getting, sorry.
No, it's
Like I can drive you down miles and miles of city streets where the good intention of having a great project has kept us from having a good project, and now the neighborhood has been, downgraded to such a degree that nobody's willing to make that huge investment.
Yes.
They'd make a third of it and create a really good business there. And honestly, in a city where we need to be really smart about encouraging and supporting, our diverse populations, those kinds of new businesses that are often run by, new Americans, new residents of Des Moines, are never going to be able to put together the capital to make a great project, happen and accommodate all of our city requirements on day one. But we can really improve a lot of our commercial nodes, our corridors, and Carl wrote about this I saw it when I was gone, but I don't know what day you wrote it in the last week, but I think we've all been talking to people that have been advocating for kind of a common sense approach. No doubt we have to be careful.
but I think that's one thing brought up by the person they're being hired in economic development, is to spearhead through those small businesses once they come in, then what is it is going to trigger what? And I
Right.
think I've talked about too, I think that was the purpose of that position, is like, what can we phase in? Again, what's the master plan? What's your good intentions, but to get them open, get them going, and then they can make those improvements as they go. So,
But the initial cost is going to be a site plan, which some of them
well,
can't afford that. And so I know there's talk that we will create some type of shared funding, maybe to come up with a site plan for, but that, I mean, that's some of the biggest costs that I hear what you're saying, but that still requires a site plan update is because you're not going to let small changes happen to the property until you know exactly what the big change is, and they have to follow each one of those changes over a period of time. But the upfront cost to getting these buildings occupied and moving forward is the site plan that a lot of these new businesses don't have it in a budget.
I think you have to look,
The design, so.
But I've got a separate issue that is related to the rental
okay.
code piece that
I think we can do more on this other one.
Break
Yeah, that's
Back-
fine.
bring back-
I just,
and if you wanna go
it
back
was
to the
brought
rental.
up, so.
Yeah.
And this is something that I was actually expecting to see based on a previous work session we had, which is the lead service lines at rentals. And since we had that discussion, the requirements that are going to be on us at the federal level, I think the Biden administration's taken action where communities are expected to replace all their lead service lines within a 10-year period. One of the things that we discussed was the kind of the low-hanging fruit. The first step is that if you have a rental property and a rental license, making replacement of your lead service line a part of the rental licensing process, and potentially doing that over 1 or 2 licenses. But at this point, if we've got a 10-year deadline for compliance, to me, it seems to make sense that that is a place to start, and that we should be updating our rental license code to address that. And we talked about that when Waterworks was here talking about lead service lines, and I thought that was going to be rolled into, or a recommendation was going to be rolled into our next home rental update. So I'd like to see that as part of this code update process.
And if I could make a comment, I'm not going to support anything that has something like that. I don't think we have that 10-year mandate yet. And when you talk about low-hanging fruit, I think there's better ways to reach our goal, like when we're doing street maintenance, that's the time to have everybody update their lead lines. But to put the burden on a landlord who may have one home on a street to spend $10,000, that's going to impact the affordability of those homes to be rented. And we know that we need affordable rentals in our city of Des Moines. And if you make landlords spend $10,000 to update their lead service line, that's not going to happen. They'll sell the houses, and then we have more of a housing concern. We had talked about we could do testing, and because there really haven't been that many cases, I'm not aware when Ted was here from Waterworks that they found any houses, any rentals that have tested with high amounts of lead. It's basically when somebody's doing street work and those pipes get moved around, that's when we see the leaching of the lead. So to put something in the rental code does not seem fair to the people who have made the investment to have homes in the city of Des Moines who are renting them.
I'm new to this subject. I have followed the residential program that Waterworks has done in Riverbend.
Right.
But I guess I'd need, and maybe somebody has access, could be Josh or administer, just something that, like, what are current regulations, what long-term, what's there, what's the difference between a service line and a street line? I mean, I know that inside the houses is what's been the big hurdle in River Bend, you know, how do you create a program where those can be fixed inside, you know, homes? And so I don't know what we're talking about, because I thought we were doing pretty good with lead pipes in the streets.
Yeah, I think that.
Yeah, so the service main, or the mains have been replaced. It is simply the private service lines with some exception of where the private starts, the check boxes and
From the street.
From the street.
The
to the
stop
house.
boxes from the
Yeah.
street up to the house.
They may still have some lead.
Right.
Yeah.
They suspect, I mean, Waterworks has an inventory, and I think some of what we found with the River Bend is that some of the places that they think have lead service lines, when they go to check,
Already fixed.
don't. They've been
Already been
fixed, they
fixed.
just don't have data on it. But
Yeah.
they suspect there are 20,000 of these lead service lines in the city of Des Moines. And part of why this is being addressed is what happened in Flint, what happened in, I think it was Jackson, Mississippi.
But separate
There were-
issues, Josh.
There were
Completely separate.
there were two different issues. So what happens, in most cases, it's a hazard just sitting there, and Linda, you're absolutely right.
Flint went to a
Yeah.
different water
Right.
supply.
So there is still an issue, they have to be replaced.
And that's why they're doing this, so that in the future, if there's a triggering event, you don't all of a sudden have 20,000 people in your community that don't have safe drinking water because they have lead service. And that's one of the things that I think is going to be a requirement. It's an issue we know we have to deal with. It may be being sped up. I think regardless, it makes sense if someone wants to own a property for
Profit.
profit, having them over time. So if we phase it in over a couple rental certificates, we give them advance notice, they can budget for it, they can even potentially work with neighbors to lower the cost on a joint contract. I think that's an appropriate way to start chipping away at this problem, so that 20,000 becomes 16,000.
I think we should keep profit out of it, because many landlords do not make a profit.
Well-
That's not why they're doing it. And the Des Moines Waterworks has a whole website set
Yeah.
up on their
I think at
webpage.
this time, only because of the time, why don't we,
So how about I suggest this, Mayor, that given new council, we will put together a summary with Waterworks and an update with what the EPA has talked about, because they have thrown out this potential 10-year limitation, understanding that that would be on the Waterworks to do, not the city necessarily, but we need to be at that table. So we will put out an update that includes the history of that, so that you can see the
One
discussion.
quick request, I don't want to drag this out, but if Waterworks has a database of 20,000, and we have a database of where our rental and
Oh,
certificates are,
that's been looked at.
can we marry that and see?
That has happened.
that has
Okay.
happened.
That has happened.
All right. All right.
And again, it goes back to, how many of those even still have a water issue?
They might
So
not have a
that-
water issue.
Until they go in and check it and inspect it, so.
Test it.
And
It's not,
That's the
they'd have to
easiest
dig it
way.
up, so.
No, they don't. No, they don't. Waterworks can test it.
Well, you can test to know whether or not there's lead in the water,
But
but
you-
that doesn't address whether or not the lead pipes in the ground.
Correct. But many of those lead pipes are absolutely no problem. It's when we do street work that causes
Okay.
the problem.
Okay, so you're going to come back with other things on, get us more information on that, and any other changes at this point? Anything else other than that?
wow, great job.
4:20 for a closed session, 4:40 for swearing in.
We have a closed session today, too?
Yes, a very quick one.
What time?
It's his.
4:20 is the closed session. 4:40 is the swearing in. 5 o'clock is the regular meeting. And actually, I want to introduce to the council that are left, if you three would like to come up and give us a little information on you, Harris and Nova and I'm sure. These are students who have come in from the Harvard Public Policy Program, and they're going to fix this city in 2 weeks. So if you guys want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'll give the broad intro and then we can all do individual. We're a group of fellows from the Bloomberg Center for Cities at Harvard Kennedy School. We're here to assist Mayor Bosin, or newly minted Mayor Bosin, with her transition. We're looking at some policy issues broadly. My name is Harrison. I grew up in Iowa City, actually, and I've been in Massachusetts for the past 4 years, but really happy to be back in Iowa helping.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be
If you want to come
here.
up.
Right. So I am Noshan Nova. I grew up in Bangladesh, but then spent the last 10 years all scattered between Pittsburgh and the Northeast. Currently in graduate school with these guys. My past focus has usually been on industrial policy, economic development, economic growth. So a lot of the neighborhood revitalization work in Des Moines is super interesting to me. Yeah, excited to be here.
Hey folks, my name is Zubair. I'm from New York originally. I lived in Iowa in 2019 while I was working on a campaign here. And I've done campaign management in the past. I've also been a teacher, and I'm doing some policy work with Mayor Bosin now on early childhood education development in Des Moines.
So thank you, and welcome to Des Moines. And how much longer? Another week?
The 18th.
So anyway, if anybody has any questions for him or any desires, let us know. But
You have offices here or office in a coffee shop?
What,
We're working out of her office, actually, just back there.
in the back, we got that worked out. So they're back there. If anybody has any questions, I'm sure they'd love to talk to anybody that has any information or would like to just visit with them. So thank you for being here. I remind them we had a 7:30 work session, so not that they probably want to be here at 7:30, but thanks for coming.
Thank you.
So we will
8:30
see.
Boston time.
I guess we are done, and we will see everybody this morning, or this afternoon.
Oh, that's what this